guess we can get started. I don't want to keep you too long, Michael. So it looks like we have about 89 people here.
Oh my gosh.
That's great. That's quite a book group.
That is quite a book group.
Sure is. I know, I feel like I should put this like
Oh, right.
up front and center.
I have one as well.
Yeah. So I'll get started. So thanks everyone for coming. We're so excited to have Anne Goldstein and Michael Reynolds here to celebrate Elena Ferrante's Lying Life of Adults. It occurs to me when I say that there are actually two ways to pronounce adults too. So do we say Lying Life of Adults or? I guess I'll start with some introductions, starting with Epiphany. Starting with myself, I'm Rachel Lyon. I'm the editor-in-chief of Epiphany and a novelist. We're so thrilled that you're here. I'm just going to read a few remarks, so please bear with me. So for anyone who might be joining who does not know our publication, Epiphany is a nearly 20-year-old literary journal. We support practicing writers and artists at every stage of their careers. We publish 2 print journals annually, as well as essays, fiction, and poetry online year-round. And our relationship with Elena Ferrante actually goes back many years. We were the first English language publication to print her work. And currently, if you check out our website, we have 2 excerpts from her novels from past issues of the journal available on the website. So I'll put those links in the chat here. I should say in the past year, we've grown substantially. So Epiphany staff is the biggest it's ever been. Our list of subscribers has grown 4 times what it was a year ago. We're really excited about all of this growth. We're publishing more online than ever before. We have several exciting ongoing series, poetry and fiction that's original to web publication, as well as selections from print. We have an interview series called the Epiphany 10 with authors and poets, illustrated by Kendra Allenby, a cartoonist who we know and love. The essay series, the Epiphany, which employs 4 essayists per year to write a series of 10 essays each. And Music for Desks, which is a new series about the music that writers listen to when we write. We'll also we'll probably be introducing an advice column soon, which I'm very excited about. And then we also sponsor an annual contest, which brings visibility to student writers called the Breakout 8 contest. It's now in its 3rd year, and we're actually in the process of choosing this year's winners right now, with the guest judges Marcus Wicker judging poetry and Amber Sparks judging prose. And we're really excited. It's been a really incredible quality of submissions and a lot of them this year. So that's a big part of what we do to support emerging writers. And lastly, we're working on expanding our event series with more exciting conversations like this one. So I am beholden to ask you, if you are here tonight and you are as excited as I am about the Ferrante Book Club, please consider supporting Epiphany. We are a nonprofit, independent nonprofit, 501c3. We're unaffiliated with any university or organization, and we do survive on grants and donations. So I will put that link in the chat too. You know, I did the math, and if everyone who's here tonight gives just the cost of a couple of drinks, as you might buy if we were doing this IRL, that would actually cover the cost of the prize money that we're giving to this year's Breakout 8 winners. So without further ado, now with that all behind us, I'd like to introduce the topic at hand. So Elena Ferrante needs no introduction, but I will introduce her anyway. She is the author of 7 novels, all published by Europa Editions. including the four New York Times bestsellers, and her latest, The Lying Life of Adults, came out last month. Ferrante's fiction has been translated into over 40 languages and shortlisted for the Man Booker International Prize. She was named one of Time's most influential people of the year, and the New York Times has described her as one of the great novelists of our time. And we are joined tonight by Anne Goldstein, an American editor and translator from Italian, who's best known for her translations of Ferrante's, Neapolitan Quartet, and of course this current one, and Michael Reynolds, who's the editor-in-chief of Europa. Michael is joining us from Italy tonight, so we're particularly grateful to him for staying up late.
No, thank you.
So thanks for being here, both of you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, it's so great to have you. So I wanted to start with a question about your relationship with the content. So Michael, I noticed in my sort of poking around to prepare for this, that you had compared the relationship between Anne and Elena Ferrante to the relationship between the characters in the Neapolitan Quartet. And I just thought that was such a lovely comparison, and I thought that might make a good jumping off point. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I have no idea if Anne agrees with this description or connection that that I see there, but it seemed to me that the Ferrante phenomenon has been so much about relationships and very often relationships between women. The books have spoken to women about their relationships. It's spoken to all of us, I think, about our relationships. And, you know, the sort of pull and push that exists in friendships, in professional relationships, in family relationships, in romantic relationships. You know, it seems to me that that's one of her great subjects. And there's always, I think, some kind of relationship, some level of intimacy between a translator and the author she's translating. But in the case of Ferrante, you know, she's sort of obligated Anne in a certain sense, or, you know, Anne has choice. And there again, it's difficult to say, is it obligation or is it choice? Right. Where's the line there? To have more of a relationship with her work and with, in a certain sense, with the author as well, because, you know, in so many events like this, you know, and in a position of being somewhat of a surrogate, a stand-in for the author, in many ways. So, you know, that parallel sort of really interests me, as you know, and I hope that one day there are people around who, and you know, actually there are. I know Tiziana, who you know, and Tiziana De Rogatis, and Stiliana Milkovic at Oberlin College has written about these sort of relationships and how they continue to be sort of played out in real life, in sort of the, you know, the Ferrante world, in the real world, yeah. And so, you know, this relationship between author and translator seemed to be another example of how, you know, some of the kinds of relationships that Ferrante writes about seem to be played out in the real world.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, you know, of course that's true in some way, but it's also complicated in the fact that the other person isn't a person. I mean, in my mind, she's a person, but she's not a flesh and blood person, as far as I know. I mean, as far as I'm concerned.
Mm.
So, but it does definitely play out in a kind of mental or emotional, intellectual way. I mean, you know, there's the push and pull, as you say. There's the sort of the intellectual relationship. There's an emotional relationship, of course, and there's a linguistic relationship that's very that's really the closest relationship, I guess you could say, you know, between her language and my language, or my language that's her language. You know, how would you even put it?
Yeah, yeah.
Just case
Yeah.
proving the point.
Yeah. And that, you know, that's kind of, if you look certainly, well, I think at all of Ferrante's books, but certainly from My Brilliant Friend on, it's that's the question at the core of them. How do you say this? How do you put this relationship into words, or our relationship in the, you know, in their books? And, you know, so it's, again, these kinds of questions are played out now in the relationship, the linguistic relationship between Anne and the source material. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I would imagine it makes the work feel less personal in a way. I don't know. I wonder how would it change your experience, do you think, Anne, if you did know her personally?
I don't know. It depends if, you know, it depends how involved in the translation she is. And I mean, not that she couldn't be actually, you know, she could be as even as a non, I don't like to, as an absent person. She's an absent person. But she could be, I mean, I guess she could be more present. But anyway, I don't know. I don't know how it would change. I mean, I guess I would have a picture of a person that's different from, I mean, maybe, first of all, I guess there would be a physical picture. There's not a physical picture of, I mean, a portrait picture of Ferrante, but I have such a strong idea of her voice and of the person writing the books that she is kind of a real, I mean, she is a real person.
Right. It does seem incredibly intimate, the work of translation, no matter.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I know, I forget who it was, a German translator once, talking about how the author said to him, "Nobody is ever going to read my books as closely as you have."
Yeah.
So,
right. Of course.
You know, that's true in some way.
Well, I have some questions of my own, but there are a lot of people here, and I do want to ask as many as we can before time is up. So so Anne, until 2017, you were the head copy editor at The New Yorker, and you've spoken about this elsewhere, but how do you understand the connection between your work as a copy editor and as a translator?
Well, the obvious thing is that they both require great attention to detail, and in fact, attentiveness to text. And they also both require attentiveness to the voice of the author. I mean, to how the writer expresses him or herself. And well, you've probably heard me say this, but at the New Yorker, people always would complain about, oh, everybody sounds the same. You know, the New Yorker has this rigid style and all that, but it's really not true. I mean, I think that our goal was always to make a writer sound as much like him or herself as possible, which you could say is definitely what a translator is trying to do, is to convey the voice of the writer in another language, but somehow to convey it as that writer, rather than just, you know, your own voice, for example. So yeah, there are those kinds of parallels.
We have a question from our poetry editor, Simona Blatt. She says, I read somewhere that Ferrante's writing is more vulgar or more provocative in the Italian, which is what sort of initially relegated her to obscurity in Italy. I wonder if this is true, and if so, how that kind of language gets translated. In the English, I wouldn't say that she's necessarily a vulgar or challenging writer, but rather it seems like it appeals to American audiences precisely because it reflects an American psyche, if that makes sense. So Simona wonders if that's just cultural luck, or if there's the Italian is indeed unconventional, and how the translation channels that into English, or the opposite, whether it's been normalized or groomed
Complicated question.
for their audience.
I mean, Michael, you could probably answer this too, but I'll say I can just say that, I mean, it's not, her writing is different from most Italians' writing, most Italian novelists. I think that's what it is. It's not that it's necessarily vulgar or ugly. It's just that it's different, don't you think? I mean, wouldn't you say, Michael?
I do, absolutely. And I think that is sort of one of the great sort of sea changes that she's brought, in a certain sense, to Italian literature, to Italian writing. It's I agree, it's not necessarily more vulgar, or you know, it's not a question of there being more curse words or more cussing or anything like that. It's a very direct, very, I guess for want of a better word, sort of muscular and at times sort of unrelenting kind of prose. So that there's that sense in which it's not maybe as polished as maybe Italian readers may be accustomed to. And actually Ferrante speaks to this, doesn't she?
Yeah.
And,
She says,
and I think in Frantumaglia, he said, I don't want it polished. I said, the more I polish it, the more I often feel it gets further from the psychological or the emotional truth that was there, you know, in the first draft, or when, you know, in the earlier version. And that may be, you know, in Italian they have the expression la bella pagina, yeah, the sort of this, you know, the beautiful page, as if a page were, and the beauty of the page were an aesthetic end unto itself. And that's not the kind of writer that Ferrante is. Yeah, she's after, I think, from what I understand, from what she says in her interviews, she's going for something different. And that may, I think, appear to a lot of Italian readers as you know, vulgar or indecorous or something.
Yeah, she talks about that. I mean, about wanting to get to the truth of things and not to write, as you said, not to write beautiful sentences necessarily.
Right. She said somewhere that she doesn't ever outline her books. She sort of has a linear approach to the writing of them. And I think you've said elsewhere, Anne, that you have ended up translating some of the books as you read in a similarly linear way. I wonder if there's a kind of a connection there, you know, in terms, sort of, if there a kind of sympathy grows up between the writing process and the translation process that seem to be happening in similar ways.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you haven't read, if you don't know what's going to happen, and I mean, I do that with it's obviously a first draft, but yeah, I mean, I've done that a few times where I'm reading along with, I mean, it's as if it's happening in real time, as if the book is happening in real time, and you do get involved in a slightly different way. I think you get more, you know, you can't say, oh, well, I guess I know what's going to happen here. It's like, don't do this, or yes, do this, or, you know, you become much more part of the story almost.
Right.
Yeah.
And
I think that I always think, you know, I'm sure that you've all seen, I know that you have, Anne, you know, a simultaneous translation live. Yeah, if you've ever gone to see an author who doesn't speak English and there's a translator working with that author and whispering the translation in her ear and then translating a response, right? And it's a kind of magic. It's really extraordinary to watch.
Yeah.
You know, difficult to understand how it's possible. And also there's something super intimate about it. Like the only other situation where you would see somebody sort of so close is a romantic situation, some intimate situation.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, obviously it wasn't exactly the case, but Anne's translation of the Neapolitan novels was, you know, almost simultaneous with the writing of it, relative certainly to what typically happens with works in translation. And so I think that, you know, from my perspective, there was an extra degree of intimacy because of that fact, because it was so simultaneous, it was so contemporaneous, the translation with the writing.
Yeah, it was. And in fact, so much so that I couldn't read, since they were published as she wrote them, I hadn't read the end before, you know, each book was separate.
Right.
So I hadn't read to the end when I was still translating the beginning. I couldn't read to the end because there wasn't any end yet. So it did. It was sort of
It sounds like an exciting process.
well, yeah, when it's not frustrating.
A comment from the audience, Nisa Davison says it's interesting that Ms. Goldstein is being referred to here as a translator when a better word might be interpreter. Would you say that resonates with you?
No, I don't, I mean, yes, because every word that you translate is an interpretation. I mean, in that sense. But I don't know. I mean, usually, I mean, in the normal, I'm not quite sure what the difference would be, except in the normal sense of the words, an interpreter is a person who's doing it live.
Right. I think when we talked earlier this week, you mentioned you might bring some particularly interesting translation challenges. I'm also very curious about the tangles that you might get into linguistically and on a sentence level. Would you like to share those?
Well, one example that I thought of that I didn't is on the level of a word. At the beginning of the book, Giovanna, the heroine, is in a bad mood at dinner, and the father of her close friends uses this word about her, and there's a whole discussion of the meaning of this word and what it means. So you can imagine, I mean, you have to come up with a good equivalent, I mean, a good translation, because there's so much hanging on this word, which in Italian is arcigna. So, you know, I mean, I had a lot of stern, dour, grim, surly, you know, you just have all these, these synonyms. So I tried it many different ways. I mean, I had it, I think originally I might have even had surly for quite a while. And then at the end I changed it to grim, because it also had to be meaningful. It had to be a word that she might know and might not know the meaning of. It had to be a word that her precocious friends did know the meaning of. And it had to be like slightly insulting or seem slightly insulting to her. So, you know, you have to consider all these things just for one word.
That moment was so interesting because it really underlined her youth, right? Like grim, what is grim? Like the way that when you first learn a word, it sort of sticks in your mind. Yeah.
So
and also the speaker. I mean, it has to carry the speaker's personality as well, because he's such a pretentious twat, right?
That's right.
Friend of the father. So it has to also come with that as well.
Yeah.
So
No, that's the kind of thing that we work on.
We have a couple questions for you, Michael, from our operations director. So first, since the English translations are so phenomenally successful, I'm curious if they've caught anyone translating into other languages from their English version rather than the Italian. And if so, I police that.
It is written into every publishing contract that every translation must be from the Italian. There have been some concerns that not everybody is following that to the letter, but we haven't found any sort of hard and fast evidence of that.
Well, please let us know if you do work.
Okay.
And then the follow-up question, if he's curious about the rights situation for a well-known author like Ferrante in China and Russia, two big markets with lax copyright enforcement.
Yeah, I mean, we have, she's been translated and published in both of those territories, those countries. In terms of, you know, copyright violations and pirated editions and things like that, there's, I think, no doubt that they're out and about, and in many cases may not even necessarily be pirated editions, but unreported editions. And you know, I don't know if there's any real solution for that problem. And for us, you know, I guess we've been just sort of keeping our eyes on the principal markets for Ferrante, where the infrastructure, the publishing infrastructure, is a little bit more solid and a little bit more reliable, and we can depend on more accurate reporting, and hoping and keeping our fingers crossed that what is happening in markets that are, you know, where there's more of those kinds of violations, including, you know, often Italy, the home market for Ferrante, can be a problem as well. You know, I don't know if there's much we can do to police those kinds of violations.
Well, I want to get into some of the themes of the book, but the questions are coming strong and fast. So let's do a few more of those, and then we'll turn to the themes of the book at hand. Mona Miller asks, I'm wondering, what are the most challenging aspects of translating Ferrante's work? Have you met her? And do you talk to her about any aspects of the translations? What's she like? And what's the difference between the Italian and your translation? So, which I'm sure you're trying to make as true to the original as you can. I guess I might ask too, right? You're probably attempting to preserve a kind of a flavor linguistically, so, which is a very qualitative problem, but the sort of technical aspects of manipulating language are, you know, I don't know. How do you square the qualitative versus the technical there?
Maybe there's really not a difference. I mean, it's, to me, it's usually, I mean, I tend to stay pretty close to the original. I don't mean that I, you know, translate word for word. Maybe that first draft is word for word or pretty close to it, but you know, you can't translate word for word, or else you won't have an English sentence.
Right.
So you have to be constantly balancing what you're reading in Italian with what is going to make something readable in English, but not just, I mean, you're not just like rewriting in English a story. You're trying to write it in the author's words. I mean, you know, that sounds a little bit incomprehensible, but I do think that sort of staying with the text and going back to the text, even when you're, you know, like on the fourth or fifth draft, that it's really helpful to know if you've conveyed what she's conveying and kept her voice. I mean, I don't think that voice is something, at least for me, it's not something that I can consciously, you know, sort of interrogate myself. Is this in her voice? Is this in her voice? I just have to stay with translating the words,
right,
and making sure that they work together, that the words work in the sentence, that the sentences work together, and that in the end you have Ferrante.
I think that and that's really interesting about voice. I've never heard you put it that way before, and I think, you know, now that you say that, I think it's a mistake that many translators make, to sort of contemplate and ruminate on on voice, on this question of voice, and think, okay, what does this voice sound like and that becomes sort of the framework within which they do their translation. And very often, I think it can lead them astray in the translation, or make the translation less faithful, or feel somehow far from what it should sound like. And I think your approach to sort of not thinking too much about voice, but thinking about the sentence and thinking about the words that are used, actually results in you know, in the ability, the possibility of conveying more of that, of Ferrante's voice in the end.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a very literal-minded person, so maybe that has to do with it. But it also has to do with copy editing. I mean, that's another connection with copy editing.
Yeah, I love the idea that, you know, I mean, language is a medium, right? And that's kind of, that's what it is. Like, there's nothing behind the words except a ton of meaning. But like, that's by manipulating the words themselves, you know. Anyway, it's a very existential problem. So we get this question, Ferrante's prose is very particular. It's thick, dense, intimate, almost embarrassingly authentic. Ms. Goldstein has translated everything, Jennifer Spiegel is asking this question, everything Jennifer's ever read by Ferrante. And she's always wondered, is your stylistic fingerprint on here? Are you partially responsible for that breathtaking intimacy?
No, I mean, yes and no. I mean, yeah, I'm the translator. I'm writing the English sentences, but I didn't write the Italian sentence. I mean, I'm not responsible for what I'm bringing into English. I don't know how to, I mean, I don't really know.
Well, so this intimacy question, let's go to the book. Let's go to the book. So I found this embarrassingly intimate is a great phrase for some of this, and for much of Ferrante's writing, right? It's really, it's part of what struck this American chord, as Simona put it, right? And it seemed to come at this very vulnerable time in to America during the Me Too movement and so on. And my sense is that's part of what has made her such a incredibly resonant figure for American women. I don't know if you'd agree with that, Michael.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I think the timing was fortunate. Was everything. It seemed to be necessary. Also, at a stylistic level, I think you know, this immediacy of address that Ferrante has, this sort of unflinching way of addressing and writing about certain subjects, unflinching style that makes you flinch at times when you're reading it, and you know, that in itself as sort of an aesthetic, a literary proposition, I think was necessary. And you know, I remember an article about Ferrante coming out during the sort of height of the Neapolitan novels, and was actually an article about Ferrante's work and Ta-Nehisi Coates in Between the World and Me. And there was so much when I read the headline that I thought, oh, finally somebody has seen certain connections that I saw between these two writers' subjects. But it ended up being an article not about that, but about the similarity in the mode of address, the way that both writers were so direct and so immediate and so intimate, the way that they were you know, addressing their readership. And that, you know, both of them, I think, were, you know, sort of, or have become now part of that decade, right? They were zeitgeisty in the same way. And it has to do, I think, with, yeah, the subjects, of course, and just this great saga dedicated and devoted to the emotional and psychological life of women, and women's lives and relationships between women. But I think also there was something about this, something stylistic that resonated, that does resonate even now in Ferrante's work.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, she was asked about the Me Too movement, and she wrote, a certain disdain for the feminism of mothers and grandmothers has spread among the younger generations in recent years. There's a conviction that the few rights we have are a fact of nature and not the product of an extremely hard cultural and political battle. I hope that things change and that girls will realize we have millenniums of subservience behind us, that the struggle should continue, and that if we lower our guard, it won't take much to eliminate that, at least on paper.
Yeah.
4 generations of women have with great difficulty gained. So,
and how right she was.
yes,
No, that was from 2014, I think, that interview. And a couple of years later, we had this, misogynist pig elected to the highest office in the country, and
by women.
yes,
yeah,
yes.
yeah.
And I wonder about Giovanna and her role, her being a more recently concocted character, right? She and living more recently in time, living in the early 90s versus
right.
the 40s. How does she fit into this process of understanding women's role in particularly Neapolitan society, but in society in general?
How does she fit in? I don't know. How she's another younger version of the women that we've already met in Ferrante's writing. Well, she's not really another version. She's a little bit different. She's obviously from a different background. She's starting off in a different place. And as you said, in a different time.
Right.
But she's facing the same issues in a way. What's her relationship to the world? What's her relationship to her parents, or to men, to other women? I mean, it's another angle.
In some ways, it seems to me that the world that she lives in, or maybe it's just Vittoria and the sort of looming presence of her aunt, but that the world she lives in is as angry as she is. And there's, she finds herself reflected here. I mean, that's the very premise of the book, is about finding herself reflected somewhere, or finding herself as a reflection.
Finding more reflected in Vittoria's world, you mean, this anger?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, one of the interesting differences between Giovanna and Lila and Elena is, of course, the class and the intellectual tenor of her family. And I remember in that long interview that Ferrante gave around this book, and someone asked, how was it possible? Because Lila and Lenore, they had to work so hard. It took 4 books, right, for them to even have a modicum of emancipation, if you will, or to free themselves from their roots. And Giovanna seems to, whether or not she does is another question, but she seems to sort of emancipate herself from her situation much easier. The emancipation is much easier. And Ferrante responds, well, she's been given certain tools, right, intellectual tools, certain opportunities that Lina and Lenore never had, and that makes a big difference for her journey. And that, I think that is sort of a different cross section of Naples, that we haven't seen it. It doesn't make it any less important or any less necessary for her to carve out a destiny of her own and to find a reflection and some way of learning about herself and learning about who she really is. Those things are still as necessary and still very difficult, but perhaps not as difficult, as they were for the characters in the Neapolitan novels.
Yeah, right. And there's that question of class too. I mean, she's
Right.
coming from this totally different world, and I think it's much easier to navigate from the middle class down to the lower class and visit the Victoria in another neighborhood than it would have been for the girls of the Neapolitan Quartet to go to another neighborhood.
Yeah, I mean, just think of them going up the hill to visit Professor Galliani.
Yeah.
I mean, how complex is that compared to Giovanna going down to visit her? I mean, which is also complex in a different way, but.
Right. Right. How do you see this relationship between class and gender playing out here? Because I think there's also, I mean, that it's so, there's so much to it. But I found that the freedom that you're talking about, Michael, right? There's and the relative traps that these girls are all in. You know, she's such a fierce character, Giovanna, and she has so much anger and she's such an alpha in a way that I find so few, you know, literary characters are. She has so much power in all of her relationships, really. Still succumbs to this sort of tragic you know, need for being called beautiful, which we all, you know, have, of course, but like it's really her downfall in some ways. And when she goes to become an adult, I don't know, at the end of the book I wondered where that was taking us, whether it had to do with fitting into a kind of trap or deciding that it's okay to fit into a kind of trap. Or
yeah, I don't know. I mean, are we okay talking about the ending in this context or not? Do we know? Should we take a survey or not?
Maybe we should take a survey. I think we should actually do that in Zoom.
Yeah. But
no, we have something that says don't. Okay.
It is for me. Perhaps the most sort of brilliant technical achievement of this new novel is how, and I find this always about, you know, Ferrante, you affirm one thing and then you affirm the opposite. Yeah. The narrative frame, right, is so tight, right? It's like one of the earlier standalone novels, and she's saying it starts here and it stops at this is the story that I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to recount what happens between this and that.
Yeah.
At the same time, I'm not exactly sure how the book ended. Yeah, I'm not sure what to take from it, whether that was, you know, that is a gesture of emancipation and she's being, going off to live a sort of continue a life of emancipated woman and having created or started to create a destiny for herself, or if, as you suggested, she's been sort of co-opted by a system and expectations and you know, being over-determined by her class origins, and I don't know.
Yeah.
I really don't.
Well, so there's some reassurance for those of you who didn't want the end spoiled. You may not. We all interpreted it differently anyway. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what about you? How did you take that final line?
I think it's ambiguous.
Yeah.
I mean, the ending is ambiguous. The ending is, it's Well, it's hard to talk about without without giving something away, but it's not necessarily what you expect.
You've talked a little about the difference between translating Giovanna as a narrator versus the other narrators of Bronte's work, and how it was a little uncomfortable. I found this book uncomfortable to read at many points. It was really not fun to revisit being a teenage girl.
Right. No, that was my feeling too. I was, as I probably said this, but you know, I didn't want to go back to being a teenage girl.
No.
It was every bit as unpleasant as I expected. But I mean, you know, that's the genius of Ferrante. I mean, that she, you know, you can't stop well, I mean, of course I couldn't stop reading, but you but you can't stop reading it because it's I mean, the language, the sentences pull you in, pull you along, even though the content is not all that pleasant. And it also, you know, it makes you see things in a different way than you might have seen them, and go places that you might not have wanted to go.
Right. Right.
You guys think that is tough? You should try being a man and reading yourself in Ferrante. That's really tough.
How so, Michael?
Oh, gosh.
Well,
can you expand on that?
I can't think of a single redeeming feature of any of Ferrante's male characters, although she had a nice couple of words to say about Enzo, right?
Enzo, right.
In a recent interview. I
Yeah,
suppose
right.
the only sort of, only one, but it's difficult. You know, it's you know, it's two seemingly opposite things at once. It's clear that these books are about women's lives, but she certainly doesn't spare men, and this sort of, you know, interrogative drive that she has to sort of reveal warts and all, your soul. And on a number of occasions, you know, you read about male characters in Francis, and you go, you know, I've done the same thing, I've thought the same thing, I've acted in the same way. How did she know? How did she know that I did that? Yeah, and that's I think one of the recurring tropes for readers of Ferrante is that almost every reader feels she's writing about me. She's writing about me and my relationships and that time in my life when this was happening and my friend did that and my friend did this. And that's true also as a male reader.
Yes. Yeah. It really, you feel very naked reading this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me get back to some questions here. So Victoria Lidwin asks, as the Neapolitan dialect is not quoted in the book, what might it sound like to English language ears? Is the dialect in the Italian version? I'd like to learn more about how it's used and what it conveys in the book.
It's not, she doesn't use it. Ferrante doesn't use much of Neapolitan. She uses a word here and there, slang words. When she says he or she said in dialect, she then speaks in Italian. I mean, she goes on writing in Italian. I mean, dialect is the, you know, it's the family. Well, of course, this is another great difference between Giovanna and Lanu and Lila, is that in Giovanna's family, dialect is forbidden because it's considered to be the lower class or working class language. In those where Giovanna's father originated, I mean, where he came from. Mm-hmm. So he's particularly eager to get rid of dialect because it represents what he wants to get away from. But it is the language that's used in families. I mean, it's the language of relationships. It's primarily a spoken language. There is a literature also, but so that's, I mean, it's not overtly in the writing in the Italian. People who know Neapolitan, I mean, I don't really know. I know a little bit, you know, I know words here and there. I can recognize them, but people who know Neapolitan say that there's a kind of dialectal cadence in her writing, but you know, I don't know, and I don't know how you would convey it, at least consciously, in English.
Right. Is it a little similar to like a thick Boston accent or something?
No, it's more than an accent. It's a real language. It's really a language. I mean, there, for example, there are Neapolitan Italian dictionaries, or in the HBO series, they were shot in dialect. The actors all speak in dialect when, you know, when they're home, when they're talking to each other, and that's subtitled in Italian.
Oh wow, yeah, yeah. We have so while this Brit Canty asks, while translating Ferrante's work, did you visit or stay in Italy, even in specific regions where the novels are set, to immerse yourself in the world of the novel and the characters?
Well, I would like to, but I don't normally. I mean, usually it's, you know, it's not possible for whatever reason. I mean, I've been to Naples when I translate. I mean, I had been to Naples in the past before I translated the Neapolitan novels, and I've been there several times since. I actually didn't go there during the time I was translating them, but I mean, I had a sense of Naples. I'd, you know, been to different places of different parts of Naples, but you know, it's always better if you're in the place, or if you have a close experience of the place. Even, you know, even if you don't really use that.
It depends what language you're translating from, man. I think, I don't know if you know, being in Iceland in the winter or something like that, if you're translating Icelandic,
no,
it's always
Right.
Sure, it's a beautiful place.
Yeah, but I wouldn't have minded, you know, a few weeks on Ischia or something.
Ischia, yeah, right.
Clara Hillis asks if in the process of maintaining Ferrante's voice, how you go about either maintaining a distinctly Italian flavor to the prose, that is, the English clearly reads as a translation, or do you attempt to modify the prose sound like it was originally written in English? And I guess there's a long, you know, long-standing disagreement in the translation community about this question, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. I mean, I don't really think about it, I guess, is the short answer. I mean, I don't know how you would describe trying to leave the Italian in the English. I mean, I don't really know what that would mean, or however he put it. I didn't put it so gracefully, but I mean, you know, I use some Italian words, but it's not like that I say, oh yeah, I think I should put an Italian word in here and an Italian word in there because it would, you know, because it will give the flavor of Italy. Sometimes you have to do it because there's no good way of translating the word. Sometimes there is a reason to do it. I mean, sometimes there is a kind of, it does remind you that you're in Italy, or that you're in this particular place and time. If you see an Italian word, like, I mean, I don't know, I think I didn't translate the food, for example.
Yeah.
In the Lying Life of Adults, because it was just too complicated. I mean, you would end up with something that just sounded ridiculous. It wouldn't sound like English or Italian. And it just seemed better to not to translate the names of food, even if they weren't necessarily foods that were familiar. I mean,
right. Of course, she eat with her dad. They always have
pasta, I forget what it's called, pasta prosciutto.
Which even if you did translate that into English, it would still stop the reader. They'd say, why are they having such a giant snack right after?
Yeah, exactly. Better not to know.
Right.
But and people are more, I mean, in translations, like early translations, let's say of the 1950s and 40s and 50s, you'll find something like, instead of spaghetti, or pasta, you would find noodles or something. I mean,
right.
but I think people are a little more, you know, or more, there's a more global world now. People travel more. So I think it's okay to use words, even if they don't know them, even if the reader doesn't know the actual word, the reader can say, okay, well, it's a snack. I mean, I can look it up.
Speaking of that, so the global world issue, I wonder if this is so we see Ferrante's world getting a bit larger in this book. I mean, I think there's something universal about like girls dressing in all black and wearing heavy makeup in the early 90s, for instance. More, and it feels a bit more accessible in some ways culturally than, or less like a, maybe accessible isn't quite the right word, but it doesn't feel quite like as much of a unique, rarefied world in some ways to me, or as a reader, than the world of the Neapolitan novels. Do you think that she may be moving in a more contemporary direction, and sort of embracing a more global perspective over time?
I doubt it. I mean, I have no idea, but I don't see her as even thinking in that way. I mean, I try to avoid saying what I think she might think, but
sure. We don't need to speculate.
Yeah.
I see this, I mean, sticking sort of with the book, this most recent book, The Lying Life of Adults, I saw it very much as a sort of ingenious choice that she made, because, you know, that's what happened to the world in the 90s, in the 80s and 90s. The whole world became less unique, flatter, more like every other place in the world. And I think she's sort of reflected that beautifully. Yeah,
Yes.
and Naples in the 50s was Naples. There was nothing else like Naples in the 1950s. Naples in the 90s, you know, obviously has its distinctive characteristics, but in other respects, it resembled Paris, London, New York, and you know, some other Mediterranean, Marseille. You know, where there was a Gap store probably somewhere, and a McDonald's opening up, right? So, you know, I think it's the temporal particularities of the book, in a certain sense, determine you know, the physical characteristics and the physical description of Naples.
Yeah, right. And it's almost even exaggerated due to the real traditional practices that are still happening. For instance, when she goes to the Catholic Church, I loved those scenes because it feels so different from her experience with the parents talking about revolution and, you know, touching each other's feet under the table. And then she goes to sort of like, oh, it felt very ancient.
Somehow back in time, yeah. Sure.
And she has no trouble saying, oh, I don't believe in God. Right. It does seem like it's related, that element, to the social class difference. So we have an anonymous question about the relationship between class and religious practice in the book and in Italy. Could you speak to that a bit, Michael?
Oh, gosh, I was hoping you might ask Anne that one. Religion is a new entry, right? In Ferrante's work, in this book, it somewhat sort of notably doesn't play much of a role in the Neapolitan novels. It clearly wasn't. I think I would assume, you know, reading the books, it clearly wasn't a part of the characters' lives, and must not therefore have been sort of part of the author's vision of what that community, that neighborhood, that class was living through at that time. Here it's sort of in the picture for the first time in her work that I can remember. I may be mistaken. And I don't, you know, maybe there's you know, I'm entering into the sort of realm of literary criticism here, and I'm not a literary critic, and I don't know, but you know, maybe there's a a degree to which sort of religion suddenly enters the picture, really because Joanna has more tools to sort of free herself from certain areas of her life, and you know, she's of a different class, and maybe religion is there to sort of say there are other traps waiting for you. Yeah, careful, you may be able to free yourself from this, but there, you know, there are other nets waiting to ensnare you in other parts. You know, I don't know. That's me. That's my interpretation.
Yeah, but I wonder if the Neapolitan novels, it's taken for granted in a way, and that's why she doesn't really. I mean, like there's the whole scene of Elena's parents being, you know, really upset that she's not going to get married in the church.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know. There was few other little things, but it's not. But you're right. I mean, it's not like a big element. You know, it's not like, oh, let's go see the priest.
Right.
Or let's go, or you know, it's Sunday, we have to. But somehow it's in the background in a way.
Right. There's also you know, she's the daughter of people for whom it might be shocking or annoying, or you know, it feels like a rebellion for or Giovanna to go.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
You're right. Yeah.
Here's an interesting question. Do we think Lying Life is an homage to Proust? Samantha Schnee says, in the reading of this book, it struck me that Ferrante is working and reworking the same themes in her considerable oeuvre. And there was a line at the opening of chapter 6 referring to the passage of time that put me in mind of Proust. I think also Giovanna's reading Proust at some point, isn't she?
Yes, she is.
Yes. She's so, I mean, Ferrante is so, you know, indebted to the authors, the pole stars. She has a lot of sort of authors that she's read, the tradition that she's versed in, and, you know, what comes through in the interviews. And I think also if you read very carefully, is this extraordinary literary knowledge that she has, this literary culture that she has. It's unbelievable. Yeah. So probably the answer is yes, with yes to just, you could just slot in a number of other authors and say, you know, maybe also to them as well. I mean, it's hard to ignore Flaubert also in this book, right? This opening scene where the father says she's getting, or no, she sort of elaborates what he said as she's ugly, right? I mean, that's essentially lifted from Flaubert, and she speaks about this, what an extraordinary line, what a courageous line. And what an amazing thought for a mother to have at that time, especially. And she was always fascinated by this, you know, this possibility that a mother could think that way about in Flaubert, right? Yeah. So, you know, that's in there as well. But I always see very sort of classical echoes in Ferrante, and here, you know, it seemed to me that sort of the Neapolitan novels were you know, very much indebted to the great theatre of ancient Greece, and between Aeschylus and Euripides, Sophocles, obviously. With this book, it seemed, you know, she was moving on to sort of the Latin tradition. I see a lot of Ovid, in this book, and I don't know. I think the literary references would be difficult to know where to stop, because they're everywhere.
Yeah. Well, she's certainly you've stumbled on a contemporary classic, have you? What is it like for, and this is a question for both of you, to sort of safeguard this person through this enormous success and have this role in this phenomenon?
In what safeguard?
Well, to keep her identity, of course, I know you don't know her, but just sort of, I don't know, be representing this book. You're doing this incredible tour, so many interviews and so on.
Well, I mean, I guess I really, I love her writing and I love her books, and I think it's, you know, it's in a way, it's kind of a privilege to be able to talk about them, or to talk about my part of them. So yeah, I mean, it's well, I guess it's a privilege.
Yeah, yeah. Michael, what about you?
I feel the same. I mean, it's been a great privilege. The question of safeguarding, neither Anne nor I have a secret to safeguard, because we don't know her. So we're not really keeping anything or safeguarding anything. Being involved in the publication of her books has been a privilege, and it's been extraordinary, and sort of the highlight of my professional life. Absolutely, in so many ways. It seemed to me that she, had this gambit that not being present as an author might mean that readers read her books more carefully, or read more carefully. I don't even know if it's necessarily reading her books, but the idea that if you want an answer, or if you have questions, or you have an objection, go to the book. See if you can figure it out there, figure it out yourself in your relationship between reader and text. And it's been amazing to just sort of watch that actually happen, and to see how people and readers engage with these books. And I think Anne, in that regard, in sort of the engagement with all of the events and all of the the questions and the events like this that we've done and that she's done, has just sort of encouraged that even more. And it's, I don't know, it's an extraordinary moment. I think an extraordinary thing to have happened. We're flabbergasted.
Yeah, that's amazing. Maybe that's the best description.
Yeah. How prophetic she was to sort of guess right that this would happen. Although it doesn't seem like she was after,
I don't think it was this. I mean, it's only sort of my impression and my reading of, seeing what she said on this question, and I think it sort of began as a very genuine and private sense of sort of, not wanting to be involved in the promotion of a book, not wanting to do events, and then, it seems that she discovered a creative space within that absence that was important for her. And then sort of as the popularity of her books grew, also a philosophical or an aesthetic gambit. There, this idea that the engagement with the text would be greater. So I think it comes from a very genuine place, not necessarily, her thinking 30 years ago, 35 years ago. They'll learn that it would be better if I'm not around. I think it's grown sort of very organically, and she's stayed true to this principle, which also I think at times has been difficult, because, the offers that have come in for her to sort of reveal herself, or to be involved in an interview in person, have been immense. But she's held this position, and I think will continue to hold it.
I mean, she's become more present in the sense that she's done all these more interviews.
Absolutely, absolutely.
but but as you say, she's maintained that absence at the same time.
Yeah. Well, she wouldn't be who she is without it, right? And there is, I mean, we talk a little bit about the way in which this book is not just the book itself, but the experience of reading the book. You know, there's, and Ferrante would not be Ferrante if we knew Ferrante, right?
Yeah.
Which is not to say, I don't know, I like it this way.
Yeah.
No, me too.
I'm going to ask 2 more questions and I'm going to let you go. I know it's late in Italy, and frankly, with a little baby, it's late for me too. Only 9. But we have a question from someone who seems to be a translator. Robert Smith says, on the topic of dialect, when Giovanna's father says the sentence that makes her want to see her aunt, Giovanna says her father has a rare lapse into dialect, but as narrator, she reports the sentence in Italian. Oh, forgive my pronunciation. Sta facendo la faccia di Vittoria. Giovanna's mother later tells her she didn't understand what he meant because that sentence is a sort of private joke that means something like you're pulling a Vittoria between them. In Italian, given that Giovanna doesn't speak Neapolitan and faccia really does have this potential polysemy in that context, Giovanna's mother's explanation could seem plausible. How do you convey that in English?
I'm sorry. You go with the literal translation.
I'm getting a sense of a philosophy of yours here.
Well, you know, I never thought of it as a philosophy, but I find that it probably offers the solution. I mean, it's kind of like going back to the way we began this conversation. I mean, it's kind of like Ferrante saying, you know, if the sentences are too polished, she will go back to her original. That where she feels that the truth is stronger than when she's, you know, made this beautiful sentence. So I'm just gonna go back to that.
Well, I think that's a good note to end on, actually. let's stay with the language here. The solution is always in the language. Thank you both so much for being a part of this event. So lovely to have you. And I want to say thank you to all of the participants too. Your support really means the world to us. I hate to end on this note, but I'm going to. If you enjoyed this event, I put a link in the chat. We are a nonprofit and we do survive only on grants and donations. So, you know, if you'd like to support us, and we would like to do more events like this in the future, please consider donating. Michael, any last words?
Oh, last words. Gosh,
Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel, and all of you who are listening or have been listening. You should absolutely support Epiphany. They've been great supporters of Ferrante, but far beyond that, the magazine, I think, uniquely in the sort of landscape of American literary magazines, has been consistently supportive of work in translation and culturally diverse voices, and you know, great work from authors that I think we wouldn't be reading if it weren't for Epiphany. So yeah, support the mission.
Thanks, Michael. All right, I'll let you guys go. And
thank you.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thanks, Rachel.
Nice to see
Bye.
you.
Bye. Good to see you.